Hey guys, welcome back to Econ class. Today we're going to be looking at producer and consumer surplus. Now, if you haven't watched the demand, supply, and the equilibrium videos, make sure you go and do that first before moving on to this one. But objectives for today are to define, identify, and calculate consumer and producer surplus, explain the relationship between the marginal cost and the supply curve, and then explain the relationship between the marginal benefit and the demand curve. And then finally, define and identify on a model allocative efficiency. Now for this concept, we're moving into an area known as welfare economics. And what it looks at is how the allocation of resources benefits buyers and sellers through market transactions. So the big question here is, how do we make those benefits as big as possible? Where are we optimizing satisfaction for both the buyer and the consumer? Now, first off, we have consumer surplus. It's the extra satisfaction beyond the price paid that the consumer receives. So let's look at an example. Let's say I go to the store and there's a shirt that I want and I'm willing to pay $20 for it. My marginal benefit of buying the shirt is $20. So I'm willing to pay at least $20 for the shirt. Now I go to buy it and it's only $12. So I'm getting $20 worth of satisfaction for only a $12 cost. So I am getting $8 in consumer surplus. Now on the supply and demand curve, the area above the price but below the demand curve represents our consumer surplus, indicated in the blue area there. Now producer surplus is from the producer's point of view. You know, it's the extra revenue beyond the minimum price that the producer is willing to sell at. So everything above the supply curve but below the price represents our producer surplus. So a specific example, let's say that the producer is selling shirts and he is willing to sell at $15. That's his marginal cost. He's willing to produce it and sell it at $15. But the price is actually $20 in the store. So they're selling this shirt for $20. The producer is getting $20. He's willing to sell it at $5. He gets an extra producer surplus of $5. It's beyond what he was willing to sell it for. Now to understand this fully, we have to assume that the demand curve is also the marginal benefit curve. And I'll explain why. So let's say at $18, 0 items are being sold. At $18, there's no consumer that's willing to buy this particular product. As the price drops down to $15, one consumer comes in and buys it. Now that consumer values it at $15. So his marginal benefit of receiving that good is $15. So as that price drops down, he's willing to buy it. All right. Now the willingness to pay is the maximum amount that a buyer is willing to pay for a good. So it's the marginal utility of a product. If I value something at $20, I'm willing to pay $20 for it. If it goes up any higher, I'm not willing to pay it. And if it goes any lower, I'm going to get a little consumer surplus out of it. As price drops down, we know law of demand, the quantity demanded goes up, as does the size of the consumer surplus. So price drops down to 9, 3 consumers are now buying this product. Now, the marginal buyer, this is an important concept here, he is the person that would leave the market if price goes up. If price would go from $9 to $12, we would lose that third consumer. But if price would drop down, we're going to gain another marginal buyer. Price goes down to $6, we gain that fourth consumer. He is now willing to buy the product because price is a little bit lower. But if it goes up any higher, he's going to leave the market. He is the marginal buyer. The marginal buyer receives no consumer surplus from buying this good. He values it at $6. It costs $6. His consumer surplus is 0. Drop down to 3. We are at 5. All right. Now, so consumer surplus as a whole is the willingness to pay minus the price paid. And we're looking at it for all the consumers in the market. It's the area above the price and below the demand curve. So at $18, there is nobody buying the product. There is 0 consumer surplus out there. Price drops down to 15. 10 people are willing to buy it. This triangle, this blue triangle right now represents the total consumer surplus for all 10 of those consumers in the market. Remember, the marginal buyer is that 10th buyer, the guy that comes and buys that 10th product. He's receiving 0, but the previous 9 are all receiving a little bit of extra satisfaction beyond the price that they paid. As the price drops down, we gain more consumers. All right, that lower price increases the existing surplus. Everybody that was willing to pay $15 is now getting $6 in extra satisfaction. That price has dropped down to 9. Plus, we have additional consumers joining the market. So as the price lowers, the amount of consumer surplus continues to increase. When calculating consumer surplus, we're going to find the actual dollar amount of the entire consumer surplus for all the consumers in the market at a given price. Now to do this, we're going to use a formula you all should be familiar with, and that's just the area of a triangle, the formula for the area of a triangle. 1/2 base times height, or base times height divided by 2, however you did this. So as we drop price from $18 down to $15, 10 consumers join the market. So this little blue triangle right here represents the total consumer surplus. So what we're doing, base times height, 10 times 3 divided by 2 equals 15. The total area of that triangle is $15, and that gives us our total consumer surplus. Price drops down to $9, and we have a lot more consumers joining the market. We're up to 30 people buying this particular product. So we are once again going to do base 30 times height 9 and divide by 2 gives us 135. It's a real easy formula. Now, we drop down even further, more consumers join the market, consumer surplus increases to that new blue triangle. 50 is the base times 15 the height, divided by 2 ends up being 375. So that's how you calculate consumer surplus. Now before we get into producer surplus, I have to reiterate what makes up our supply curve first. Now a supply curve represents the seller's cost. And we know it's upward sloping, more producers are willing to join the market as price goes up. It measures their willingness to sell, okay? So at each particular point on the supply curve, there are more producers willing to join the market. So our supply curve equals our marginal cost curve. So at $3, 10 sellers are willing to provide this product. Now this area under the supply curve kind of represents the extra cost to produce those 10 units. So as we move up to $6, more producers are willing to sell. That is the additional cost to produce those 10 additional units now. So the area under the supply curve kind of represents the extra cost to produce these goods. So as price goes up, more and more producers are willing to join the market because the price is higher, their marginal cost is higher, so they're willing to sell at those particular prices. So that area under the supply curve represents the marginal cost, the extra cost of producing all those units. Now while the extra cost to produce is everything under the supply curve, producer surplus exists above the supply curve but below the price level. So it's the price paid by the consumers minus the cost to produce. So at $6, we are supplying 20 units, and this pink triangle right here represents the total producer surplus in this market. Now as price goes up, more suppliers join the market. There is extra surplus for those already in the market, and the new consumers add additional surplus to the market. So this new pink triangle represents the new producer surplus. Now we calculate the value of this area the same way we did with consumer surplus. We have 1/2 base times height, the area of a triangle. So in this case, our height is 9, our base is 30. 30 times 9 divided by 2, $135 is the total producer surplus at this particular price. Now, the marginal seller, just like the marginal buyer, this is the guy that's going to leave the market if price, in this case, goes down. So that 30th supplier right there, that 30th unit supplied, the marginal cost of that particular unit is $9. So if it goes any lower than that, he's going to leave the market. That will go down to 29 or whatever it would be going down to. So he's the first guy to leave the market if price drops any lower. So as price goes up, producer surplus continues to increase, and more sellers join the market, increasing the size of that surplus. Now in a simple model, without taxation, without international trade, without price controls or quotas or anything of that nature, total surplus is easily calculated by adding up the consumer surplus plus the producer surplus. So it's the value to the buyers minus the cost of the sellers, or the area below the demand curve but above the supply curve. It's all the blue plus the pink area in this particular model. So allocative efficiency, this is an important concept here, is where consumer and producer surplus is at a maximum. And as we add different changes to this, price controls, taxation, and things like that, you're going to see that's going to interfere with achieving allocative efficiency. But it's simply when we're producing at equilibrium, the spot where the supply and demand curve intersect, this maximizes total benefits received by the buyers and by the sellers. So production and consumption occur until the marginal cost of the last unit produced equals the marginal benefit of it being consumed. So marginal benefit has to equal marginal cost to be at allocative efficiency. Now why don't you take what we just learned and put it to practice? In the description below you'll find a link to a PDF of producer and consumer surplus questions dealing with what we just covered. A few different models, having you calculate real values for different producer and consumer surpluses. So make sure you're giving this a shot and watch the follow-up video going over this. And make sure you check out the next video in the series. As always, guys, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.